Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest chat with my heroes. Unbelievable. I have to reflect upon the fact that, you know, I'm in a position now where I can email the two people who are responsible for so much fun in my life, and they'll respond and say, hop on the show. I'm so thankful, so blessed to be able to have this opportunity. But let me not blather on. This is not about me. This is about the two gentlemen who have joined me. I really mean that, by the way. So I'm sorry if I think I made Rob blush or something like that.
No, it just cracks me up. You said that we hopped on. It took us like 8 weeks to schedule this. So.
Well, I did just come in from work and like, oh my God, I get the Zoom link out. So hopping on for that. Okay, so these are the designers of the Pandemic Legacy series. So my favorite game is Pandemic. You see a whole wall of Pandemic right there. There you go, Matt. Let's look at all that. This is it. This is in every video. So there you go. Not fronting over here. So actually, I will introduce Matt first. He is Mr. Matt Leacock, designer of many of your favorite games, including many iterations of Pandemic, as well as the Pandemic Legacy series, and has a very exciting upcoming project, which we'll talk about at the end of the show. But before we get to that, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I do not have as many of this man's designs on my shelf, but I very much enjoy the entire Restoration Games project, which is something that Rob is very intimately involved with, and also the godfather, progenitor, I don't know what you call yourself in terms of the idea of legacy. So something highfalutin.
Yeah, we can go highfalutin.
Okay, the grand poobah of the legacy concept. For 10 years, we're talking Risk Legacy. I actually played Risk Legacy at the time before there was any legacy. Very excited to see what was coming, and then we got 10 years of a lot of different stuff. So we're going to reflect on that. But before I get to that, Mr. Rob Daviau, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. And it's been almost exactly 10 years because I just celebrated my 10-year wedding anniversary, and I remember reading the first review of Risk Legacy on my honeymoon. So it's like 10 years ago this week.
Yeah, I was looking at the thing. It was 2011 that Risk Legacy hit our tables. All right, cool.
Yeah,
So we're having this conversation in two parts. Pandemic Legacy Zero has been disseminated. Unfortunately, it came right as the pandemic began, the real pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So we're going to get to all that and talk about the pandemics and the second half of our episode. The first half we'll be talking about legacy in general, the state of legacy, how it's evolved. It's been 10 years. Legacy is, for a while there was like the thing. Right? It was the thing. Everybody, when Pandemic Legacy especially hit, it was the thing. So when something becomes the thing, it gets to be defined differently, right? People understand it different ways. Is legacy boxes? Is legacy stickers? Is legacy permanence? Is legacy storytelling? Is legacy just a campaign? Is So let's just start from the very beginning. At the 2011, like we can start from there. Rob, how did you, when you first kind of developed the legacy concept, what were you thinking? Like, what were some of the constitutive elements that went into what you thought a legacy game was?
What I was thinking really was, this is a really bizarre idea and I'm going to be laughed out of the industry, but there might be something cool here. I came up with the idea. I've talked about it a lot over the past 10 years, so I'll do a real quick version. But I came up with the idea for Clue first and sort of pitched it to Hasbro, like you get a rap sheet, the usual suspects, and people get out of jail in a series of crimes. And they weren't interested, and makes sense. Then I moved it over about 9 months later to Risk, which they were willing to take a little bit more of a chance on and do something a little different. And really at the beginning, it was about the permanence. It wasn't about boxes or storytelling in any particular way. And if you look at Risk Legacy, it has the sort of thinnest story. It's just more of gives you a bunch of tropes for your group to put together a story. And it's very nonlinear. And some people have said that was their favorite one. They really didn't want stories in later ones. But it was about putting stickers down and making permanent changes and not being able to go backwards. And that was like the real idea, that a campaign that's permanent, playing poker for real money. And what I discovered pretty early on in the playtesting process, non-COVID cough, allergies.
You can have all the COVID you want. We're totally ensconced in our
I prefer to have none.
No COVID for you. Good.
Okay. that if you gave people all these stickers to use and there was no governors to them, they used them all in the first game. There was no sense so it's like you get these scars, I think we call them, where you can put up defensive terrain and offensive terrain, and people would be like, I did it. I used every sticker possible. And now what do I get for game two? I'm like, nothing. Those were supposed to last and you were supposed to be tactical with them. And it didn't work. So I said, oh man, I need some way to give them like starting stickers and then new stickers and then maybe different types of stickers. And I went, well, what if I just put them in an envelope? And then when you're playing, you sort of open it up when you achieve some sort of milestone. And at the time I thought, well, that's pretty interesting because sometimes in Risk, you're not winning, but it just takes a while to lose. And I thought, well, maybe that person can then look at victory condition B and say, well, if I'm not going to win, at least maybe I can get that envelope open. And it would sort of be a consolation prize. And what I completely misjudged is how appealing a wrapped present is, because everyone just treated them like the primary thing. Like, yes, it's nice to win, but how fast can we get to these goodies? And those two things sort of became a tent pole of a sort of like permanent change. So your game goes off in a different direction and unlockable content that help drives a narrative and basically is an expansion inside the box so that you don't have to learn all the rules at the beginning. You play a couple of games and you say, okay, here's a new rule. And it allows the game to get very complex without starting out at a high level of complexity, and just kept pushing, like, what silliness can we do in this box? I just decided if we're going to try this, just try everything. And to my delight, it did well.
Yeah. Speaking of that, because I remember playing Risk Legacy. I don't think we ever finished our campaign. Like, we didn't kind of need to because we opened up a lot. That was the thing. And I still remember there was a point where it was me and another opponent, and we were looking at the condition for unlocking a box of stuff. No spoilers, right? Even 10 years out, I'll respect spoilers. And we were saying, although it's Risk, so it's like, okay, obviously there's like nuclear fallout involved. So it's like, in order to open this box, we need to get into a nuclear war. Neither of us benefited from this nuclear war. Like, we could have just played the game, but like, we have to open the box. Let's just get into a nuclear war just for the heck of it. And to have like these left turn gaming moments created by the lure of the unwrapped present and the stickers and all that. That was definitely part of the Risk Legacy.
I was saying, like, I was just, in retrospect, it was obvious. If it, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons growing up, and I've never played or ran a session where if you put a lever in a room, someone doesn't pull it. You can't go, well, it's not hurting us now, so let's just keep walking. Probably just gets worse. Someone is pulling that lever. Right. And what I did is I gave a box of levers and buttons and Christmas presents and things to open, saying, yeah, you open these, it's your call when you open them. You don't have to wait. I mean, you have to sort of get to this condition. And it just became a lure that, people couldn't get away from. And I think that was when Matt and I started working on Pandemic Legacy. That was like an insight I already had, going into that.
Right. So then Rob is designing Risk Legacy. I know we've talked about this a couple of times too, but we're just kind of laying familiar tracks so we can move forward in the conversation. What were the things specifically that drew you to wanting to adopt the legacy model to your baby?
Oh, for Pandemic, you mean?
Yeah, that's Pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
I don't know. Do you think of Pandemic as your baby? Or do you have many babies? Or
yeah,
like that?
I think after all these years, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it really came out of a discussion with the publisher at Z-Man. Like, we were just brainstorming different ways we could take Pandemic as you would, right? I mean, it was successful, and we had done some expansions, and so the idea of like, hey, what if we came up with like Pandemic the dice game, or Pandemic the card game, or Pandemic the legacy game?
Yeah.
And I remember laughing about that when that was suggested, because I was working at a startup at the time, and the thought of like coming up with a Pandemic legacy game just seemed like way too big of a task. And so I'm like, yeah, whatever, that maybe someday, and shelved the idea. But I think it was a few months later, I opened up a sketchbook and just started sketching like what ifs, what if we did a Pandemic legacy game, what would that be? And I just furiously scribbled out these notes. They just started pouring out of me all these different story ideas, all these different mechanism ideas, and so on. And after filling up a couple pages, I'm like, okay, we got to make this happen. So I got back in touch with Z-Man, and they put me in touch with Rob. And
it took a little while, because you weren't at Gen Con as I was at Gen Con, and then someone from Z-Man said, Matt Leacock's trying to get in touch with you, and I went, The only thing I can think of is Pandemic Legacy. That'd be cool. That's probably not it. I don't know. Right. And then it was 2012. No, 2013. 2013.
I'm
It
usually
was
up by 10 years.
2013. I had left Hasbro a year before. I was still very much hustling to make a name for myself outside of Hasbro and doing freelance and pitching ideas. And so I got home and completely forgot about it. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was walking through my basement and I saw Pandemic on the shelf. I said, Matt wanted to get in touch with me. I should try to.
Right.
I went up on Twitter, I'm like losing my way, and I added him, like, are you looking for me? And we kind of traded direct messages and then emailed, and then that's how it got started. It was like September of 2013.
Yeah, I should look for the original email. I know it was pretty short. It's sort of like, hey, do you want to do a Pandemic Legacy? What do you think? And I think you just wrote back yes.
I just wrote back yes in like the largest font size that it would let me, like 144 point.
Yeah. And then that just kicked off 5-6 years plus of maybe longer?
Yeah. Let's see, 2013 to 6 years. So 3 games in 6 years. And we got on a phone and we started talking, and we're just trying to like figure out, can we work together? Can we brainstorm together? And I was like, I did Risk Legacy, and I was in the middle of doing Seafall at the time. And I said, the only thing I'm convinced about is this doesn't work as a co-op, but we can give it a try.
Yeah, that's right.
In retrospect, Legacy works much better as a co-op, but it didn't know it at the time.
I remember also you writing something about this is going to be fun for a little while, then it's not going to be fun at all, and then it's going to be fun again. I'm like, oh yeah, that pretty much summarizes game design right there.
Yeah. You mean the designing of the game? Like
the designing of it. The designing of it. Yeah.
Because at the beginning, like it. When you design any game at the beginning, it's the notebook phase. It's the any idea counts, and there's no money or art or table. It's just the
everything works in your mind. Yeah,
everything works, and it's just like, look how clever I am, and this is gonna be perfect. I'm gonna get it on the first try, and then at some point, reality sets in. You're like, none of these ideas worked.
This is hard.
Well, I think because I listened to a bunch of interviews with you over the years, because it's been a long journey. And I remember at one point you said, Matt, it's like, okay, wow, it's so great. We're 90% done with this game. And then it's like, wait a minute. Now we have to finish the other 90% of the game.
Yeah. Usually 80%. I'm more optimistic. It's 80 and then 80.
There you go.
Yeah, that always feels right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then I guess drilling down, obviously Legacy was, why Legacy though? Like there's so many ideas, right? There's so many things that could be done, and you've done many of the things with Pandemic, and they keep on going. I guess in terms of, was it the permanence? Was it the wrapping of presents? Was it the story possibilities? Even though the story possibilities weren't even realized in Risk Legacy, because it was more emergent, right? Like people just shared their experiences. There was no, this was the first Legacy game that I believe had like a narrative, and they leveraged Legacy. Okay.
I'd have to look. It might be the second Legacy game. From Risk Legacy to Pandemic Legacy was 4 years. Yep. And I think we didn't play test this at all. Legacy came out. There were like these little card games, but I was like, Risk got a lot of buzz. I expected another one. And I think a lot of people started and said, this is hard.
Yeah.
Or it takes too much time, or I could design 4 games in this time period. And there's a lot of very tricky things about knowing manufacturing processes to make it affordable, because a lot of what you're paying for is hiding stuff. So when people open the box, they don't want to say, is this all I get? Not realizing that, you've paid for all these things. So I think part of what made Pandemic sort of do so well is it really was the second one. Like Risk was a published playable concept that did pretty well. And then there weren't that many. And then it was between 2015 and probably 2019 that a whole bunch of them came out.
Mm-hmm. And so was it the story, the boxes, the permanence, did you imagine, because Risk Legacy did not have a narrative, it had an emergent story, but it didn't have a narrative story. Like, did you see that? Like, did that compute with you, or did that emerge from discussions with Rob?
I think for me, it was just a sense of progression. Like you could set the stage this way and then make decisions that have, consequences.
Right.
And then you could tilt it another way. And I think to some extent, the story kind of like rationalizes a lot of the change. But then you come with a great story. And you're like, okay, how do we bounce back from that? And like put in really cool mechanisms to back it up. And so we're constantly ping-ponging between those. But yeah, I don't know. I think I would probably be inventing what why I was drawn to it. I mean, it was a lot of the story beats and a lot of the different ideas that we could get in there that you can't just throw all of them in the box. If you stage them one after another, you've got the opportunity to do it.
My answer of saying that it was the second one, I think partly explains it, that there was still a sense of, can you do this in a board game? And then, this is neat and it's different and it's novel and it's innovative. And I think, I've seen, fewer legacy games. I think there's one left I have that will come out next year. I'm not working on them and haven't started a new one in years. Like they take a long time. And I think people sit down and they say, I don't want to commit, 15 games like Risk to play. It's a audience. People want to see what's the next thing.
I definitely want to ask about that follow up, because the reception of Legacy has been mixed. It has been has conjured different, feelings among folks.
And that's fine. I mean, I've had people get very mad at me at conventions. Like, I don't want to play a game that you only play once. And it's like, well, there's hundreds of others.
Yeah.
Right. Like, pick your favorite game. I probably don't want to play it. Right. Like it's fine that we've got thousands of games out there, but it sort of broke some covenants that between players and, what's in the player's control and what's in the designer's control and what a board game should be and shouldn't be. And I think at a very unconscious level, if you have these unspoken rules to like everyone's role and what a game should and shouldn't do, it hits you at a deeper level. Now people just get mad at me for putting apps in games like Return to Dark Tower. That also is a very strong trigger point, which is interesting because board games have had electronics in them for decades. But as soon as it goes to a phone, there's a difference, because people want to get off their phone to play a board game, but no one ever got off their little handheld electronic device to play a board game. So there's always things that people just want their games to be or not be. So I'm not surprised.
It's the issue of updatability. Like, we're always updating our iOS, and there's going to be a point where the app isn't going to update and my board game's not going to work. Where in I can play the original Dark Tower for as long as I have like a fresh set of batteries.
Well, you've got a very particularly good set, because most of the time you get, the IC stops working, the light stops working, you get battery decay in there, things. Yeah, not to sidetrack there completely, but we have said that we will update it as long as we're in business. And if we go out of business, the code goes public, and Jeff Engelstein is basically the executor of making the code public.
Oh, that's cool.
That's good to know, people. If you're worried about your games expiring because of the app situation,
if we're not using it and we're not updating it, it's there you go. It's public domain now, and anyone can look under the hood.
So obviously, Rob's getting it a lot because he's Mr. Legacy, but that's exactly what I want to talk about in terms of the broken covenants and the broken expectations. How much did you get that, Matt, on your end, in terms of like, now I have this product that I can only play X amount of times and then it's done. Like, I can't just pass it on to somebody else. I can just, this is this thing, either I'm going to mount it on my wall, the finished board, which some people said they did, but most people said, and they didn't do it. But it's really like, a disposable game. How much of that did you deal with from the audience?
Not as much as I anticipated, honestly. I mean, I had read the boards for on Board Game Geek, for example, and understood some of the blowback that Risk Legacy had in this regard. And I think I was lucky in some respects that, Rob with Risk Legacy had broken that ground, and a lot of that actually had already happened and had been processed. So I saw many more rebuttals of like, well, look at your wall. How many of those games have you actually played more than once? And this is a game that you're going to play 12 to 24 times. So a lot of people defending it, and from a value perspective and from the quality perspective. So yeah, there was some of that, and I think that's controversial because we're breaking norms and so on. So there was some of it, but I actually anticipated a little bit more of it.
Okay.
So, the intro. I mean, I tried to see that coming with Risk. In the sense that you play it 15 times. The number was sort of, okay, what's a big enough number that you won't get super tired, but you can't complain about it? And I decided 15 was the number. And then at the end, the game just stabilizes. And then you just can play it forever and ever. And it's like every other game on your shelf in the sense that it just doesn't change anymore, but it's infinitely replayable. But again, about these expectations, because it was changing for 15 games up to that, once it stops changing, you say, well, it's useless now. And it's a real psychological thing. You say it doesn't do what it used to do. I'm like, well, it's just a board game now. Like, it's just like all of these. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work anymore. But that was put in on Risk that, like, just about every legacy game I've done, Pandemic ones being the big exception, has a free play mode at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to the end, play, and I bet 99% of people don't.
Right.
But it's there so that we can say like, no, you don't necessarily have to. But Pandemic Legacy doesn't have that, and it's sold the best.
Mm-hmm. So okay, like in terms of so a legacy has moved on, right? I mean, I remember you said at one point that you would like to play a legacy game that you haven't designed.
Mm-hmm.
So have you played a legacy game that you have not designed?
No, I don't have time.
Oh, okay. I asked
actually, I started like King's Dilemma with friends, and we bought Clank Legacy, and then the pandemic hit.
Right.
And you really need to be in person for that. You really need to have like regular stuff. And now that it's sort of, we're coming out of it, and then we came out of it in the summer, but everyone was just like, what do we do? I predict like in the fall, our game night is coming back together. It's a little spotty, and people have young kids who aren't vaccinated and things like that. That I will get to play these games.
I find that, sorry, go ahead and play another legacy game. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. That'd be interesting. I do find though that legacy has kind of morphed. And I think that the part of the reason why it's morphed is that covenant of like this, I need to be able to play this game after it's done. Right. I need to be able to kind of like, even if they don't, right. You guys can talk about all the times, like, even if they, they want the idea of it, it feels better. Mm-hmm. Right. Like I want to be able to like either pass this along or whatever there. So then you have this idea of like a green legacy game. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Yeah. It's called a campaign, I would imagine.
So that's what I'm asking. Yeah. It's like, at one point, has legacy, maybe, I don't know if this is the proper question, but I'm thinking about it. One of your thoughts that, at some point is legacy, like, is there a point where legacy just kind of like veers off and it doesn't become the thing that you meant it to be anymore? Sure.
I mean, every time I work on a new one, or Matt and I work on a new one, it changes from what it did before. And, you're constantly pulling between, well, we did this and it worked, so we can just do it again, versus we did this and we've done it already, so let's try something new. Yeah. But every person is going to have a different way that they want to execute stuff. And to be fair, it is terrifying to ask people to rip up cards and permanently change a game. As a designer, you go, am I allowed to do this? So it's just natural instinct. The more people who do something and the more something evolves, it's going to get more conservative by nature, right? The envelope was pushed, and the only place to really go is backwards to something that feels a little more traditional. So things going from legacy to green legacy to campaign, and then legacy just might mean there's a story in the box with unlockable content. The permanence gets minimized or even gone. And, that's up for anyone to decide what they want to pull it in and put it in, whatever they want to call it. I think it's interesting to watch, you look at collectible card games or deck builders, and, you usually have one at the beginning, and then people do different things, and some stuff comes into them and some stuff goes out. It's just a natural evolution of design.
Mm-hmm. I love that point about conservatism, and like, that there's a pushing, but then there's like, well, let's make it more like what people are used to, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, ahead, look at Knizia's My City, which won some awards and was pretty popular. And it's just a shorter time frame. You can play your games, and plenty of stickers, lots of envelopes. It's sort of his take on it. So I still see innovation and this being worked on. Maybe not with as much hype, but I think there's a really rich toolbox that's yet to be explored.
Yeah, and I got one of those in fall of 2019. I have My City downstairs, and haven't played it, but like the fact that Reiner Knizia was inspired by something I did, because I entered this industry in '98, continues to blow my mind.
It's fantastic. Going to Matt, did you have conversations with Z-Man about like what they were thinking about in terms of legacy and what they would want to see? Because there was obviously, trilogy was planned and trilogy was executed. Was there
sort of?
Yeah.
Trilogy was not planned. Trilogy was
credit,
like, okay.
I mean,
Right.
they were really big defenders of the product and the idea, and really bold. The whole idea of like, we're saying we're going to do a campaign that's you play through once. Fine, yes, embrace that. And then got to the point where we saw the title of the game and it had season 1 on it. I mean, this is a surprise to you as well, right, Rob?
Yeah.
We did not know that this was season 1, right? This is Pandemic Legacy. And so when season 1 went on, they're like, oh, are there going to be others?
Wow.
Yeah, we
Which
knew.
was- we kind of talked about it, but yeah.
Yeah, I had the prototype, and I lived close enough to Montreal to just drive up. It was a beautiful like fall week in like October, and I'm like, well, I'll just drive it up. We'll talk it through. We'll play. We'll meet with people and drive home. And then the publisher then was like, great, this is just so you know, we've talked about. We're really excited. People have been seeing it, so we're going to call this season 1, and you and Matt start season 2 as soon as you can. And I literally went up going, okay, that was a huge project. It was a lot of work, and I'm done. No, I'm not done. Nope. I came home with another one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was there any thought of season 2 and season 0 having that like green legacy aspect where it's like playable at the end? Or was it like now we've set the pace?
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you calling Green Legacy something that's replayable at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, there's very few things that I get particular about, but that was in Risk Legacy. Like, so it's not a new thing. And it was in Betrayal Legacy and Machikoro Legacy and Ultimate Werewolf Legacy. Like all these games I've worked on have had that.
This was the only one that was like,
the pandemic ones are the only ones that do not have that. They are the exception, which is interesting. But I've had people say like you say like, oh yes, but we added this at the end. And I go, hold up. That's kind of in most of them. No, we talked about it with the publisher, and we said, should we come up with a mode, even if it's not in the box, that we can put on the website or some sort of after you're finished. And the publisher said, no, take that time and just start on the next one. We feel confident that people will still buy it. And I remember being like, okay.
Interesting.
And relatively little fallout from it. Given,
for me, it was just a matter of like embracing the format wholeheartedly and saying, look, this is a story. It's got a beginning, it's got an end, and so on. And I mean, to be fair, you can play Pandemic on the board when you're done, but it's not Pandemic Legacy at that point, right? So I didn't have a problem with it.
Right, and the different mechanisms, you can't really do the ... spoiler alert again. It's like you're just playing regular Pandemic at that point. Just play it.
Some of them are harder to replay at the end than others. I mean, like season 2, I think would be really tough to replay. Where season 0, there are fans who have created like web apps that will generate objectives for you, so you can continue to play, and they're really fascinating. So I mean, if you do want to replay it, there's a whole lot of fan made ways to replay the game.
Yeah, the way I kind of look at it is it's playing at least the Pandemic Legacies. It's like going to a restaurant. Right? You have an experience, you look at the menu, you order stuff, and then you get to the end, and then they're like, please leave our restaurant. It's done. You can come back tomorrow. You can look at the same menu. You can make different choices. You can make the same choices, but it'll be a little different. But you can't just sit here at the table and just keep getting desserts given to you in an endless fashion. Like it's an experience rather than a product. It's like going to a concert versus listening to an album. It's like going to a restaurant. Like it's by nature going to be a little different every time, and you're paying a ticket to get on the ride, and then the ride ends. And that's hard for a lot of people. And it's even hard for me to think about sometimes.
I guess the idea is like we have this cardboard. There's a physical product here, and I think they have a whole shelf full of games right behind me, and like people walk down, they see their shelf, and they're just like, either it's being played or it's useless. Right. And you get that shelf of shame, and you get that whole narrative and everything. So it's like, I don't like bring anything out of a dinner. Everything that I experience at a dinner is going to just, be in the toilet in 3 hours. So like having the physical product is going to make
a little longer. Sorry. It mixes up some expectations and covenants, that's the thing that I think some people get a thrill out of that. I remember growing up, I collected comic books. And I would put them in sleeves, and it was going to fund my retirement. And now I'm looking to get rid of all of them because my kids are grown up and they're worth like $100 total. And I treated them like this sacred artifact, like that was dug up from the desert from 1,000 years ago. And then when I was living in New York City, right out of college, someone was selling, I'm sure, stolen comic books on the street. And for like $10, I got a box of ratty comics that were useless. And it was such a relief to throw them around my apartment, bend the cover, like just this. It went from like, I have to treat it so preciously to, I can just enjoy this for what it is. It is just a piece of paper.
Right.
It is the same thing as someone giving me a flyer for a pizza. Like it doesn't have any value other than we put in it. And I know some people really have enjoyed being like, oh man, we can have food at the table and we can have drinks. And one of the very first playtests I did with friends for Risk Legacy, someone spilled their scotch and it went all over the board. And they're like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, why? We drew a line around it, like the scotch stain, and we called it like the Highland Park front, right? Like it was just like a front where the scotch had stained it. And they're like, that's really cool. I'm like, welcome to it. So there is something cathartic to a number of people who say like, it was just nice to not worry, not sleeve, not think about it, not worry about food or Doritos on the fingers. And it was just like a nice break from everything being pristine. Now, some people have the opposite reaction.
In terms of the story that Legacy enabled Pandemic to tell, Matt, is that, I mean, we could talk about it in terms of this framework of like, okay, replayable or not, but like if they're non-replayable games, do you feel like Pandemic really realized a lot of what you were thinking about? Or would you do, like, if you had to go back, would you kind of approach Legacy slightly differently?
Yeah, it's really hard to answer, really. I mean, we explored so many different ideas across the series. I don't feel like we have a whole lot left on the table. We went through season 1 and then some of the concepts left over, or actually, I think season 2 is really a reaction to 1. It's sort of like, how could we take 1 and kind of flip it on its head and do everything in the opposite way? So yeah, I don't feel like there's a whole lot that's left unsaid or that I would change much.
The self-contained experiences really kind of worked for what you were trying to do with Pandemic, and it's all good.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, I was blown away by the reception. So yeah, I think Rob and I were happy about the game, but yeah, we didn't expect it to explode up the charts. So.
Yeah, like what a weird sort of thing. Like, does this happen all the time? Do you get the #1 game after a couple months on BG? It's like, in retrospect, like, wow, I should have enjoyed that a lot more. Yeah, I mean, you can always go back and like when the ending to season 1, we didn't know it was trilogy. So it has like an ending as if there aren't 2 more games. So like, yeah, we could go back and change those cards to do it. And there was like, maybe this month regular people say is hard and we could tweak one tiny thing, but at some point you give it your best and you just walk away and you decide that was a snapshot of our best work at that time with the data we had given. And, there's so many, like, George Lucas edited Star Wars.
I was just going to say that. I did not have a strong Lucas desire to go back and tweak things.
And he still wants to go back.
And he still wants, and he still wants to go back. And it's like, no, but I want to Star Wars from 1977 that I saw when I was a little kid. Like, you didn't make it better. You just made it not the movie that I like. You might like it better. So there's always a temptation to say, if all 3 were put in front of us and they said, you have to make this better. It's like, we could find some stuff, but I'm not sure. I don't want to. Matt, do you want to jump in and redo all of them?
No.
Actually, so I did get a couple questions, and reaching out to our Discord, One Stop Cooperative Discord. Thank you so much for chipping in with like thoughts and everything. In terms of the work, in terms of how difficult it is to execute a Legacy game, because I imagine that there's a lot that can go kind of south in terms of the player experience. So it's like, if they open the thing at the wrong time, or if they, make something permanent that makes their game really, really hard or really, really easy or something like that. How much of that like occupied the design time, that kind of issue?
That's a huge part of it. I mean, you're managing a number of different threads. I mean, one is sort of like the emotional journey of the player. Like, are they having ups and downs at the right time in a given game or episode, as it were, or across the arc, where are they kind of feeling? Then there's the complexity of the experience. Like, are we, Rob and I have a tendency to just kind of like front load way too much stuff early on because we're excited about all the ideas. And then we just kind of have to kind of push it and kind of even it out over the course of the campaign, so that players aren't just overwhelmed with too much information. So managing that kind of flow over time. And then, watching for all the different ways that the players might screw up, because they can have compounding effects, looking for any kind of usability errors, or how do players naturally want to play this stuff. And then, how are they internalizing the story over time? Is it making sense to them? I could probably come up with like another half a dozen of these. Sure. But yeah, it's not just for one game. You have to do that for the whole campaign. And that's where it really gets time consuming.
Right. And, like one of the things that we ended up doing, it's pretty subtle, and I'm not sure we did it universally, but if there was something narratively that we wanted to, do as a surprise, Like, and oh, by the way, the president has been kidnapped or whatever like that. We would usually put it at the end of a game, like a cliffhanger. So you're like, we need to come back and play another one to see what happens. But if it's a new rule that we introduce, we often do it at the beginning of the next game when your brain is fresh and you can internalize it. In reality, they're both happening between game 3 and 4. So there's no difference on paper between the end of game 3 and the beginning of game 4, except you probably went home and then you came back. And it might be 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and you might be tired from game 3. So there's all these little things that we try to do to either get you to want to play the next game or remember the new rules that were in there. And I know with season 1, I think we did this unconsciously in the rest of them, but we would introduce a new problem in a month and then give you some tools to make it a little easier in the month or 2 that followed. So you have to struggle with it the first month, really learn how hard this new, mechanism is. And next month you go, we want that sticker. That's the one we want.
Yeah, right.
And if we threw 6 different problems at players, every group was going to have 2 that weren't a problem for them, 2 that they could deal with, and 2 that they just couldn't get their head around. But it would be like a different set for everyone. So they would always buy the stickers for the things that bothered them, that they just didn't internalize or always seemed to bite them. And that was like a fun little thing to sort of discover.
All right. Is there anything else in terms of the legacy process that viewers should know? Or maybe potential designers? I actually have a couple of designers that were looking at it, and we're not getting as many legacy games. I think that, the gaming, like you said before, like maybe a little bit of that conservatism hits, and it's like, okay, I might as well just make this a campaign game. Legacy seems like it's a little bit whatever. But people might want to dip their toes, right? And so what are some of the things that, what you would tell a designer that wants to tip their toe specifically in the permanence and the unwrapping of legacy?
I would say start with a really simple game that you can modify, like a really simple core, because then you can experiment with different adornments. You add them, subtract them, tweak them, modify them. If you've got a complicated base game, and it's even harder if you've got a complicated new base game, then you've got to teach this new game. You have to teach all the complexity of it, and then you have to throw all this other stuff on top, and it just becomes a really difficult thing for people to get. So if you're lucky enough to be able to build one on an existing game, you can attract that existing audience and then give them a new experience.
Yeah, that's the key. I've only done one legacy game where it was creating the engine from scratch and doing it, and it was Seafall, and it was just so many sophomore, slump sort of things in there. Like I was new to working on my own. I was trying to make it overly complex. I kind of got all the bad ideas out between Risk and Pandemic, but that was one of the key ones, is not saying, no, the game that you get in game 1 should be the game you have 3/4 the way through the campaign. Like it should build up to that. And I could do a whole, the podcast on what I would change there, and might someday. I don't know. It's mine again now. I just don't know if anyone's like, wow, we want that one again. But I'm like, I just feel like I fouled that one off, and I could do a better job with it. And as Matt said, we would often come up with all these ideas and get excited, and we would have these ideas from January through like May of the board game, arc. And then those ideas would end up going from January to September. Like it was all good ideas, and it was just too many because, you talk about it for hours and hours. And so really look at how much you're giving your players to try to digest at once, because it's likely too much.
Yeah, if you have to rely on, I was going to say, if you have to rely on memory, it's usually a bad thing, because it could be months between games. So if you're going to make a point in the story, you have to you have to be really on the nose, and you can't be super subtle about it, or people will just lose track of things. So if you can embody things physically in the set that are really salient, that helps a tremendous amount, so that people aren't like, what the hell is going on in this game again? Because it can be the best story ever. If 4 months have gone by,
it's not
your novels too, right? You're like, oh, I read that 3 years ago. I have no idea what's going on now.
Right. Or you pick up a TV show and you go, wait, who was it? They introduce a new character. What was that person again? We tend to go a little tropier, a little straightforward, because it might be months. And so it's not quite, if you meet a bad guy, they have a sinister mustache and an eye patch and stuff like that. But, we don't want to have here are 12 characters, all with subtle hidden agendas who are working, and you got to suss them out and interview over the course of 12 games. No one will know who these people are or what they're about.
Or even mechanism wise, I definitely noticed that since you said that, all 3 of the games, it was like, okay, beginning of the month, here is one new mechanism. Here's one new thing that you need to do. And then and then there's multiple objectives. So it's like, okay, here are 2 objectives that lean on previously learned things. And then here's one little new thing, to take care of, or the new thing would get introduced midstream or whatever it is. But I definitely noticed that, like, okay, here's the, one pellet, throughout, or one new pellet, throughout the thing. And then, I think at some point you played with, like a September time would be like a time of like, okay, here you go, have a bunch of new stuff since you're already, is that intentional? Like, one, like dribble. And then like later you would kind of do some like flood, a little bit of more of a flood of stuff.
Maybe more related to like having a tilt, like 2/3 of the way through the game. So, things shift, you challenge expectations. So if you do something the same for a while, then you can really kind of mess with players' minds. That may have to do with having more, as a result of that, there may be more stuff introduced, but that's not really the goal. It's not really the goal to dump a lot of mechanisms on someone.
Yeah, those are more narrative, where we really would talk about it like a 3-act TV show or play. We talked about it's like a TV season. Okay, right. We have 12 episodes in the season. And so at the end of Act 1, which could be April, May, tease in March that something happens in April or May, you usually get like, okay, you just felt a level of mastery and we're going to pull the rug out a little bit and ask you to do something new. So then you spend a couple months and you're like, okay. And then we would do it again, like in August, September, October. And now we try to raise the stakes and say, okay, you've played 8 games, you played 9 games. Maybe you're a little tired and you want to like, let's play something else. You're like, man, we only got 3 games left and they just introduced this. Let's see how this goes. Right. This is like, we wanted to basically get into that last 20 minutes of the movie and where you're just like, how does this end? And so, we would go back and forth, because that's another thing. If people are like, why don't you do more of these? It's like, because we've done it 3 times. And like, at some point people are just going to be waiting they're going to start to see all the rhythms that are in there. And we tried to mix it up, but.
Yeah. All right. So that was our overview of Legacy. So we're going to move on to the next part of our conversation, which is just looking at all 3 pandemics and, going from there. And so that's where we're going to cut the episode, part 1 of my chat with Rob Daviau, Matt Leacock, about this state of Legacy in general. That was a really fun time. We get into more fun times next episode, also on the Shelf Stories YouTube channel, also on the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. So if you're looking for the podcast version, there is always, every single game chat that I do is going to be available on the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast feed. So I always have people coming along say, the video shows are great, but I'd love to have it on a podcast. It's much more useful. It has been on the One Stop Co-op Shop going on a year now. Very, very excited to have joined that outfit. And it is full steam ahead. All the podcasts that I do, all the video shows will be available in audio form on the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. Stay tuned for part 2, talking about Pandemic Legacy, season 1, season 2, and season 0, the games themselves, next time. So this is Jason reminding you, if you can change your mind, you can change the world. So until next time, later, everybody.